So of course, there are significant issues regarding this in mental health. We know with the even sexual abuse of children, significant adverse effects it has on them at that time and also later as well. And so we'll get into this presentation. There are, of course, chemicals involved when you fall in love. One of those is called phenylethylamine. It's a chemical that speeds up the flow of information between nerve cells. Professor Robert Fryer, Ferris State University in Michigan, explains falling in love involves phenylethylamine, or PEA, which causes a person to be less likely to be aware of the faults of the other person. PEA gives us that euphoric high, that feel good, everything is wonderful. This person can do no wrong. We've oftentimes seen people who fall in love with somebody and ask, "Are you blind?" Well, yes, they really are blind. And almost no one can tell them at that stage of the game because phenylethylamine is pouring out in large quantities. Who wouldn't get a rush with these chemicals running around? This also explains why many people, quotes, need to be in love. They are addicted to that rush of chemicals. This chemical high can last from a few months to around, how long? 4 years. Average is what? 18 months. Pretty typical relationship lengths, or about the time the passion starts to wind down after this high wears off. And so this is why we also talk about the typical stages of marriage. If you take a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, you will learn about these typical stages. The first stage is the stage of euphoria. That's when phenylethylamine is pouring out in large quantities. However, as mentioned, that's going to go away within 4 years in 99% of cases. I will show you the 1% where phenylethylamine can last for a lifetime. But a lot of people are unaware of how to be able to get that. But if it's a typical relationship, after 18 months, or sometimes it's much less, 6 months, might be 4 years, you'll then enter the second stage of marriage. What is the second stage? I didn't hear that. The second stage is the stage of non-euphoria. And so this is, you're still in love with your spouse and you still are committed, but there's times you look across the room and there's not great romantic feelings rising up in you. You don't necessarily have that attraction there 24/7 like it was during the first stage. And then if that stage, if what caused it goes from stage 1 to 2, continues on, then you'll eventually get into stage 3. And stage 3 is, anyone want to guess what that is? Dyseuphoria. Dyseuphoria. Yes, well, that's a pretty good guess. It's called the stage. And this is where you look across the room at your spouse and actually feelings of hatred can kind of come in. And you're wondering, what did I see in this person before? And of course, what tends to happen at this stage? Yeah, this is when divorce can actually occur. And when you've taken this oath, I think the oath is the same in Australia. That oath is in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer, forsaking all others. So you're committing to this marriage until what do us part? Death do us part. Pretty serious commitment there, but we forget those commitments when the hatred starts welling up, and so then we just remember that I thought I took the oath that said until love shall last, but that's not what the oaths say. But many people at this stage choose not to divorce, and so that's why they go to counseling. And so they'll go to counseling, and the counseling will say, well, do you like anything about your spouse? And they'll say, well, yeah, I like this, I like that. And then they'll talk to both and things, and then help them to be able to realize there are some benefits to sticking this out, particularly if there's kids in the marriage, et cetera. And then it goes to stage 4, which is the stage of toleration. And if you've ever been to a 50th wedding anniversary celebration, you've probably heard some things said at that 50th wedding anniversary celebration. These people are absolutely amazing. She put up with him for all of these years, and he put up with her for all of these years. I remember being at one of those celebrations, and the woman was asked, "Did you ever think of divorce?" And she says, "Never did, but I thought of murder many times." So this is not the ideal as far as marriage is concerned. And I want people to realize there is a way out of these stages, and so there can be multiple reasons why it goes through this. But what I'm going to be dealing with today is particularly the intimacy part. It's a misunderstanding, a great misunderstanding of how to do intimacy that has led along this pathway of even adverse brain changes. And of course, in our society today, we've actually, this is the Society of Sexual Freedom, and it's also increased what's called cohabitation. So people think, well, the way out of this is just don't get married and then just live with each other. And 73% of couples now do this before getting married. And studies show, however, when you take a look at this, this is not very positive. This is actually worse than marriage, what the studies show. You're much more likely to get married to, if you do end up getting married, you're much more likely to get married to a person who is not the best match. And it would not have happened if not cohabiting. Now, when you look at these studies, they'll talk about reasons for this. There's reasons why people are deciding to cohabitate and not make the commitment. And usually they're not making the commitment because they realize there's some significant problems with the person that they're wanting to have sexual relationships with, and so they're not ready to make that commitment. And the idea is, if I like you well enough when we live together, then maybe I'll marry you down the road. But if there's another match that comes along that would be a far better match, do you think when you're cohabiting that increases your likelihood of finding that match or decreases your likelihood? It decreases it significantly because you're with someone that you already think is not necessarily the best match. That's why you're not getting married. And so you are going to pass a lot of opportunities up, opportunities that you may not have ever realized would have been there if you had not been in that relationship. So that's what the studies show is part of the reason why. And in fact, one of the things that we do a lot of counseling when it comes to romantic relationships in our program. I'm not necessarily the one doing it. I'm looking at the biochemical things, but I work with counselors very closely. And they will mention in regards to the cohabiting thing that these people really are not ready to make that self-sacrificing, loving situation because they see there's significant problems with the other spouse. So if they do end up getting married, which they often do, because by this time they might have been years together and the other opportunities have passed, and well, let's just go ahead and get married, their marital satisfaction is far less, their dedication to each other is less, their commitment level is still less, and their confidence is less, and actually less intimate satisfaction, meaning that the intimacy is not near as good as it was in people who decided to make this self-sacrificing commitment first before they started the intimate relationship, which is what only 27% that do that now. Also, more negative communication with each other as well, and divorce rates significantly higher when you've been cohabiting first versus those that do not cohabitate first. So why does couple euphoria tend to wear off? Level of commitment is a major issue. We're going to talk a little bit about oxytocin. When you have that level of commitment first, the intimate act produces a brain chemical called oxytocin, which is a bonding chemical. I don't know, I'm not going to have the full time that I normally have. In fact, when I teach this at our university, I actually give 4 hours of presentations on this because they're going to be, needing to know all of these details. And so I'm going to be just, we only have about a half hour left. But what I will mention is that the studies are very clear. If you look at Stuart Brody's study, University of California, San Diego, and a lot of other sexual researchers, they will talk about only in a committed relationship does sexual intimacy improve bonding. And so really we need to have that commitment first before we're doing that in order to have that great positive effect, because there is a positive effect of intimacy in regards to the brain and relationships. But another reason is the type of sex performed. And so not all sex is the same. Stuart Brody shows that very clearly. A lot of times people are just trying to find the climax point. And whatever produces that climax they think is equal. So as long as the climax is there, we should have the same type of brain chemistry things. And Stuart Brody makes that abundantly clear that if, number one, if you're not committed, and number two, if you're not having the appropriate type of sex, that you are going to start picking off dopamine receptors. You're going to have all sorts of adverse brain changes that start to occur and continue to occur until about 3.5 years, and that's what shuts down the PEA. And so the PEA shuts down in regards to to either the type of sex that's being performed during that time, and also what can also shut it down is too frequent of sexual interactions. So there is something called sexual excess, and it's very harmful to the brain. And of course the question is, what is excessive? And of course the research has been able to show us that as well. So in regards to the desire for this is an inborn desire that human beings have, mammals have as well. For you rats and all mammals, the desire and motivation to pursue sex arises from a neurochemical called what? Dopamine. Dopamine amps up the centerpiece of the primitive part of the brain, the reward circuitry. It's where we experience cravings and pleasure and where we can also get addicted. The top of our human reward list are food, love, friendship, and novelty. Those all stimulate dopamine. And dopamine can be a good thing, but dopamine is more of a lower brain attribute. And the dopamine is there to help remind us of these things, because you could get so focused doing something good that you would forget to eat for weeks on end. That wouldn't be good, but your lower brain is reminding you that you need to eat and you're hungry, and then you have a choice. These are called natural reinforcers as contrasted with addictive chemicals. And it helps you not to forget about things during prolonged focus that would hinder your ability to accomplish the designer's will and could even compromise your ability to survive. So in regards to dopamine, the bigger the squirt, the more you want something. No dopamine, you just what? Ignore it. By the way, one of those symptoms of your 9-symptom sheet there, I think the first one, let me get this out here. First one, little interest or no pleasure in doing things. What chemical do you think might be involved in that, more so than any other? It's dopamine. That's right. It's dopamine. So if you have little interest or no pleasure in doing things, or you wake up in the morning and you're not excited about the day, you get up out of duty and responsibility but not interest, you've got a dopamine problem. And so it could be dopamine receptors, it could be dopamine production. And so no dopamine, you're going to have apathy. You just ignore it. In regards to food, chocolate cake and ice cream, a big blast of dopamine. Celery, not so much. And it turns out sexual stimulation and orgasm are the biggest natural blast of dopamine available to your reward circuitry. One of dopamine's nicknames is the molecule of addiction. And as Susan Weincheck explained in a 2009 article, the neurotransmitter dopamine does not cause people to experience pleasure, but rather causes a what? Seeking behavior. Dopamine causes us to want, to desire, to seek out and search, she wrote. It's the anticipator. It's the opioid system that causes one to feel the pleasure. Yet the dopamine system is stronger than the opioid system, she explained. We seek more than we are satisfied, and addiction may be thought of as wanting run amok. So anything that produces a significant blast of dopamine can have an addiction associated with it, and often does. By the way, speaking of chocolate, what percent of the female population do you think has an addiction to chocolate? It's been looked at as far as the American Addiction Association, what they classify as an addiction. 40% of females have an addiction to chocolate. Is it higher or lower in males? It's lower in males. 10% of males have that. And in regards to sexual addiction, we see higher in males than in females, but it can also occur in females. Repeated exposures to supernormal stimuli, however. So this would be sex not by design, which we'll define here in a little bit, or too frequent of sex. These supernormal versions of natural rewards can override our brain's satiation mechanisms, and the I'm done feeling goes away, creating unhealthy brain changes. This is why unhealthy food and unhealthy sex can be more addictive to more people than substances such as what? Alcohol. Now, is alcohol addictive? It's highly addictive. And in fact, if you're an alcoholic, a typical alcohol treatment program is going to have to put you in a rehab for maybe 4 or 5 months before you have a chance at really overcoming. Now, that's a typical alcohol rehab program. Someone asked me last night in our residential program, do we deal with addictions? Absolutely we do. But since we're dealing with the underlying issues as to why people are self-medicating with alcohol, our program, you will have just as high a success for 10 to 17 days in the program as in a 4-month in a typical program, because once you don't need to self-medicate with those things, you can get better a lot quicker and not have to go back to it. But unhealthy food can also be highly addictive. Research confirms anticipation of reward and novelty amplify one another to increase excitement and rewire the limbic system. So what are the unhealthy brain changes of having either the wrong types of sex or too frequent of even the right type of sex? The first thing that happens is desensitization. That's a numbed pleasure response. Among other changes, dopamine and dopamine 2 receptors decline in the brain's reward circuitry, leaving the addict less sensitive to pleasure and hungry for dopamine-raising and activities and substances of all kinds. More pleasure thus leads to what? Less pleasure. And the addict then tends to neglect interests, stimuli, and behaviors that were once of high personal relevance. This is what happened when your dopamine receptors start to go down. And for years, people were thinking, the sex researchers, that this would happen in everybody because of that big natural blast. We talked about it being the biggest way of a natural blast. But they have found out this doesn't happen to those in a committed relationship who are not having it too frequently. One of the reasons is, I don't know if I'll have time to explain it, but when you are having sex in the right way, you also produce another brain chemical called prolactin, which protects your dopamine receptors from being picked off. And so this is one of the reasons why marital intimacy, where the people were making that commitment prior to intimacy, why marital intimacy has been shown to be far more wonderful even years into the marriage. 20, 30, 40 years, it can continue to grow into that marriage. And the bonding keeps getting more and more. And beautiful things happen, and the PEA also stays there. But the second thing that occurs when it's either in a casual way or too frequent or the wrong type of sex is sensitization of the brain. Rewired nerve connections cause the reward circuitry to buzz in response to addiction-related cues or thoughts, and this Pavlovian memory makes the addiction more compelling than other activities in the addict's life. When this occurs, the individual also becomes more sensitive and more what? Irritable with the what? Usual nuisances of life. This is why all of these studies are showing this big connection between pornography, masturbation, and becoming more irritable with the usual nuisances of life. Anger is going to come up, just the drop of a hat in these individuals who are doing this and having that addiction being played out in their life, and they have less and less enjoyment of life. If you take a look at their dopamine levels, they're far below neutral the vast majority of the day, and only when they do their addiction are they able to get it up to neutral, but it's a short period of time, and they become difficult people to live with, and a lot of issues come about, and one of those issues is anxiety. So anxiety levels will go up considerably. The third aspect is hypofrontality, and this might be the most concerning. This is where your gray matter starts to erode. So the gray matter is there where you should have the highest energy. By the way, the most mitochondria in your body organ system is there in your brain. Your brain consumes and produces a lot of energy. And that's the gray matter. Your brain only has 2% of your entire body weight, but it consumes 30% of your energy. And that's the gray matter and the mitochondria that are doing all of that. But alterations in frontal lobe gray matter occur, and reduced impulse control occurs. That means the individual doesn't have much self-control anymore. Weakened ability to foresee consequences occur, and that means they can't reason from cause to effect as easily anymore. Dysfunctional stress circuits also occur, meaning their lower brain overrides the frontal lobe, and in this state, the individual is prone to relapse into a previous addiction that they might have already recovered from in response to stress. So after a mammal, this will be, there's mammalian sex that is quite similar from one mammal to another. And it's been shown that there's a cycle of measurable effects after sex. The first part of the cycle lasts 96 hours. How long is that in days? 4 days. During this time, the mammal's sexual motivation or libido is nil to sluggish, and he's hyperreactive to a variety of drugs. After these 4 days, he's able to copulate again, but it will take him how long? 15 days to return to maximum studliness. So here's what the sex researchers are saying. This is a direct quote from the studies. This long-lasting sexual inhibition, that was the 96 hours, resulting from copulation is the sexual act, to satiation, that's after climax, constitutes a protective mechanism against overstimulation of the brain circuits involved in its processing. So they say this sexual inhibition, where they're not very interested in sex anymore, this long-lasting sexual inhibition is a good thing, because if they drove it up again, they would start to overstimulate themselves. Now, this is something called the Coolidge effect. That's something that we would get into if we had a longer period of time to discuss this. But essentially, there's several ways that you can get rid of that sexual inhibition during those 4 days. And one of those ways is introduce a novel partner. So a novel partner will cause that libido to go up again, but then all of those adverse changes are going to occur. So during the decreased libido stage, there's only one way. They've studied this particularly in rats. A rat will have sex again, furnish a novel female. Among the resultant plastic changes scientists have already measured in the brains of sexually exhausted rats are reduced androgen receptors. That means their testosterone, even though it's there, doesn't work like it's supposed to. Higher estrogen receptors, so they become more feminine. Increase in opioids, which are trying to dampen their libido. Researchers also find a mysterious yet consistent spike of testosterone around day 7 after sex in humans. So when we are having it too frequently, the testosterone level will actually go down. It takes 7 days for that testosterone to spike back up again. And then if you go 14 days, it will spike up even more. Prolactin release is 4 times higher after PVI intercourse compared to masturbation, and having sex with a loving spouse increases oxytocin as well. But masturbation delivers a weaker "you're done" message, and so people tend to much more overdo it when they're involved in masturbation, which is now at an all-time high in both males and females. A few years ago, German researchers reported that as the duration of partnership increases, sexual desire generally declines in which gender? While the desire for tenderness generally declines in which gender? Men. Usually the more frustrated partner of either gender logically assumes he would be perfectly happy if only he could have as much sex as he wants. But the situation is a bit trickier than that. Consider what happened when male monkeys were paired repeatedly with the same females who were always in the mood thanks to daily hormone injections. Monkey heaven, right? The answer was no. The males copulated less and less frequently and with declining enthusiasm over a 3.5-year period. Not only that, when novel females showed up, these slackers hurriedly rolled into action with their original zest. So here's what the sex researchers are saying. The truth is that if your spouse isn't having sex with you as often as you'd like, he or she could be doing what? Preserving your union by preventing you from satiating yourself sexually too frequently. And I've seen this so many times in our programs. I've heard couples say, I gave it to him however he wanted it, whenever he wanted it. I didn't want to lose him, and I lost him anyway. You actually lost him anyway, more so because of doing exactly that. And so the desire for the novelty goes up significantly when you're overdoing it and you're in that addiction phase. So couples engaging in too frequent orgasmic sex eventually drift into engaging in conscious affection only when pursuing orgasm. So let me just explain the typical thing. I practiced for 26 years in Ardmore, Oklahoma, just north of the Red River. In Texas and Oklahoma are well known for a certain type of vehicle that most everybody drives. Does anyone know what the vehicle is in Texas and Oklahoma? It's called a pickup truck. And so everybody has these pickup trucks, and these pickup trucks have these bench seats. And the first 3.5 years of a relationship, particularly the first 18 months of a relationship, you'll be going down the highway and you think there's one person in that pickup truck, and as you get ready to pass it, you realize there's 2 people in that pickup truck. They're just right next to each other. They can't get enough of each other. Give them 4 years of marriage, you go down that highway, and it's very clear there's 2 people in that pickup truck. And they don't have that tenderness, they don't have that romance, those things that were there earlier. And the only time that you are seeing that affection is when they are in the pre-phase of having sexual intimacy. And so then it will pick up again. And that's a sign that they have been overdoing it. That tenderness should stay there for life. You know, I remember one time going to a marriage a seminar because I was interested in what they would be saying, because I was dealing with a lot of married partners. And I didn't agree with the marriage seminar person who was saying, you need to count it out. You need to kiss your spouse over 100 times a day. You need to do this, you need to do that. It was all of these do's in regards to all of that. And I'm thinking, if this is a healthy marriage, that's going to happen anyways. You don't have to try to keep the rules. You're going to, you're going to have that desire for your spouse, and that spouse will have that desire for you. And in fact, if you have a very healthy marriage, you have to try to keep yourself from not inciting jealousy among others when you're around each other as far as the public display of affection is concerned. And so often this whole pattern of going from euphoria to non-euphoria is a natural pattern. I understand people love each other, they're going to bed together, they're undressing together, all of that. So there's a strong tendency to overdo it those first few years of marriage. And then it starts swinging in this other direction. And then the woman, as mentioned, doesn't have the desire anymore. The man feels frustrated and then feels that they need to get it from somewhere else. So sexual satiation drives mates apart. And this is why it's good not to have it too frequently. But it can happen with food too. It's the same mechanism that causes you to say yes to a sugary, fat-laden dessert even when you're full of turkey or tofu and mashed potatoes. Dopamine surging in your reward circuitry can override your feelings of satiety regardless of what your rational brain may think about overeating or infidelity. So one of the ways of supernormal stimulus is sexual practices outside of natural PVI. Now, Stuart Brody has really gotten into this from University of California, San Diego. He's an evolutionary biologist. But PVI is called penile vaginal intercourse. And he says research demonstrates that different sexual behaviors differ in many physiological and psychological domains. These differences are remarkably consistent in revealing that an association between specifically penile vaginal intercourse and indices of better physiological and psychological function. Other sexual behaviors, and he names them: masturbation, partner masturbation, oral sex, anal sex, any sex that excludes penile vaginal intercourse, are negatively related to indices of physiological and psychological function. In other words, they make you less healthy physically and less healthy mentally. Dopaminergic pathways underlie processes of romantic attraction. The studies demonstrate that the prolactin surges modulating dopaminergic function differ greatly between sexual behaviors. Such surges are strongly associated with women's sexual satisfaction resulting from penile vaginal intercourse, but not other non-PVI ways of experiencing orgasm or climax. PVI is associated with better health, better resting heart rate variability, healthy vagus nerve activity, blood pressure response to stress is also improved, and better relationship satisfaction. PVI is associated with better relationship satisfaction, but other forms of sex do not enhance relationship satisfaction. In fact, data shows they worsen the relationship satisfaction over time. And when you understand what's happening with the brain of both partners, you're understanding why that's the case. But of complete and comprehensive commitment to each other, PVI produces a nice oxytocin boost in both the female and the male. The bonding is amazing. Marital satisfaction and intimacy satisfaction is very likely to be 10/10. Prolactin is going to be 4 times higher, which modulates the dopamine set point and prevents it from continuing to go down like it does in a typical relationship. And dopamine levels are euphoric throughout every aspect of marital intimacy without lowering the dopamine set point and dopamine receptors. What about sex frequency? The society at large kind of gives you an idea. Of course, the media promotes that more frequent sex, the better. Media emphasizes and research supposedly supports, which is not the claim that the more sex you have, the happier you will feel. Only in committed marriage relationships does sex have any enhancing effects, and across 3 studies, this is not just 100 people, it's 30,645 people. We demonstrate that the association between sex frequency and well-being is best described by a curvilinear as opposed to a linear association, where sex is no longer associated with greater well-being at a frequency of more than what? Once a week. So that once a week will produce that high testosterone levels, and this is the type, and of course you'll have increased relationship satisfaction as you increase it from once a month even to once a week. This also goes along with studies by Unwin from Cambridge. He found increased sexual constraints, either pre or post-nuptial, always led to increased flourishing of a culture. Conversely, increased sexual freedom always led to collapse of a culture 3 generations later. The most powerful combination was prenuptial chastity, that means no sex before marriage, coupled with absolute monogamy. These cultures were rational. If they retained this combination for at least 3 generations, they exceeded all other cultures in every area, including literature, art, science, furniture, architecture, engineering, and agriculture. But only 3 out of 86 cultures studied ever attained to this level. If total sexual freedom was embraced by the culture, that culture collapsed within 3 generations to the lowest state of flourishing. And this is characterized by people who have little interest in much else other than their own wants and needs. And at this level, the culture is usually conquered or taken over by another culture with greater social energy. So the question is, are we doomed by all this? And the answer is absolutely not. There's a way out to consider and a very excellent option to consider. And when dopamine levels aren't bouncing around with intense highs and lows, more subtle pleasures can register as surprisingly enjoyable, and the partners will tend to retain their sparkle. So what the researchers are talking about, in fact, you can find this on multiple sites now, how can you fix a brain that's gone too far in this direction? Fortunately, you can. There's something called neuroplasticity, and you do it by total abstinency for 90 days. Even if you're in a marriage relationship. We call it no PMO, no pornography, no masturbation, no orgasm. The gray matter will start to come back. The dopamine levels, dopamine receptors will start to come back. The testosterone levels come back. And it's called a 90-day sex fast. And even Hollywood stars are doing it and noticing a marked improvement in their relationship. We have a lot of people that have written a lot about it in regards to what happened to them after they were overdoing it and then went to not doing it at all for at least 90 days. After the 90 days, if they weren't married, they didn't start up again. They just stayed abstinent. And if they were married, then they decreased the frequency to once a week. These are individuals that have gone through it. They talk about increased happiness, pride, joy, confidence, calmness. Happiness is now found in simpler things, a walk, a nice meal, music, experiencing more emotions, feeling less numb to life. They begin to love and accept themselves more. They're able to take a stand for what's right, not backing down, stating their opinion. Increased hope, a better future always seems obtainable, they'll state, no matter how difficult things get. This is males talking, less social anxiety and fear of judgment. They're able to initiate conversations more, increase conversational skills as well. Vocabulary and words come to them more easily, and they feel more in touch with other people and their emotions. Real women start to look more attractive to them as well, particularly if they're not in a marriage relationship. They're more attentive to the interaction and physical touch than just the visual. and an increased motivation and meet and talk to women. One of the reasons why marriage is an all-time low is because masturbation is an all-time high. And when they quit this, then they have a desire for actual real interactions with people who could be potentially marriage partners. A magnetic aura occurs. This, both men and women will talk about this after they stop. And then when they do have a committed partner, there's an enjoyment of the whole intimacy. It no longer becomes just a pursuit of orgasm. Increased determination, energy, productivity also occur. Increased quality of sleep. Physically, better posture and appearance. Increased athletic performance, stamina and physical strength. You might guess that with the testosterone levels going up. Deeper voice, increased vision. Mentally, increased clarity of mind, loss of brain fog, increased concentration and focus, better decision making, improved memory. I'm going to give you some quotes of those who've completed the 90-day reboot. I love interacting with people now. Before they weren't a people person. My mental focus is incredible, this one man stated, allowing me to start overachieving at work, and it's being noticed. Now, he did talk about some of the issues in regards to this. After doing the 90 days, he was getting so much done. Productivity was great. All of his workmates were saying, "What has happened to you, man? You're working circles around us. You're just amazing," all of those things. But he said, I couldn't say, I stopped masturbating 90 days ago. He would just say, "Thank you very much. Glad you're noticing. My confidence seems indestructible. Composure unflappable. This will be my regular wardrobe now, replacing metal t-shirts with workout shorts." It's been over a decade since I started looking and watching porn, and this feels like how I truly am. Creativity now flowing out of me. Feels like my motivation to do things is more grounded in bigger picture type of thinking rather than going after what feels good in the moment. I want to go out now. I want to socialize. I want to touch. I want to work out. I want to live. I don't want to have sex with every girl. I do want a connection now. And notice what also happens. I have no interest in what type of things? Non-productive things, like playing video games or being online all day for no reason. Often these individuals who are on there, they take their breaks with porno masturbation, go back to it, and once they quit the PMO thing, they don't even have any interest to do non-productive things anymore. It's like, this is a total waste. I can't believe I wasted so much time. No longer an angry person either. And so I won't go through all of the different quotes, but I will. By the way, Carnegie Mellon did a nice prospective randomized controlled trial where they split the couples up, couples who were willing to double the amount of sex they were having, if they were having sex once a week, to see if their enjoyment of each other went up. The researchers found that couples who doubled the amount of sex didn't enjoy the sex as much and were less happy overall. So even a prospective randomized controlled trial showed that the once a week seems to be the sweet spot in a committed a marital relationship. So I will open it up for questions here, but I also wanted to say a couple of things before we open it up for questions. This is the last night that there will be any sales taking place. We won't be having any products for sale after tonight. Secondly, I also wanted to mention, I was going to mention but ran out of time in regards to a supplement for anxiety that's been amazing that also is superior to medicines called ashwagandha. When we combine that with rhodiola, rhodiola is going to have that mental endurance and some L-theanine and also some DMAE. We find some amazing improvements in the anxiety part and even sleep part, and the cortisol levels will come down nicely. It doesn't affect the adrenal glands. And this was also in some randomized controlled trials. So we have some of that out there as well. It's called Calm, so I just wanted to mention that as well. But I will open it up for a few questions. We have a few minutes left, either about this presentation or any previous presentation. Feel free to ask questions, and I think we have a roving microphone. So there's a hand over here on this side, if we can give the microphone to them. Yes, thank you.
Oh, just back on the previous presentation about the myopia and the sunshine, the vitamin D.
Yes, myopia. Myopia is actually helped by bright light and sunshine. Myopia comes about, actually, which is nearsightedness, as a result of darkness and also as a result of looking at things very close and during development and during your younger ages. And so, being in a dark room, looking at things up close, myopia is getting to be at an all-time high. And actually, kids should be far more outdoors than they're indoors on screens, and their eyesight's going to end up being better. The problem with severe myopia is even as an adult, you're much more likely to have a retinal detachment after midlife. That occurs really as a result of that stretching of that eye and the myopia. And so we want to try to avoid that if we can. Yes?
To last night's presentation, can you explain what intermittent fasting is?
Yes. Intermittent fasting means that the healthiest way of intermittent fasting is by fasting for 16 or ideally 17 hours a day. So eating a good breakfast, eating a good lunch, and then after lunch, nothing with calories. You can drink water. You can maybe have herbal tea that doesn't have calories in it, but nothing with calories. That will put you into daily ketosis. It's hard to do, by the way, when you're used to a nice, big evening meal. But after you start this out, within 1 week, you're not going to be very hungry anymore. And within 2 weeks, you won't even want to eat at all. And if you do, you'll think it's wrong. Your body will totally adjust into that ketosis. The brain-derived neurotrophic factor will be helpful as well. So it only requires significant self-control for the first week or two. And after that, you can adjust over greatly. But that's what intermittent fasting is. It's fasting a large portion of the day, but not the entire day. All right, so any other questions? Yes, question there in the back.
Yeah, my question is about COVID-19. We have been told in the last 3 years or so to get these vaccinations, Moderna and Pfizer and others. There are a lot of side effects. And what do you know about that? And what is the best way to prevent it, COVID?
Okay, so as far as what we've learned in regards to COVID, the vaccine right now is kind of a moot point because of the way the COVID has morphed, that spike protein. When the spike protein, that real lethal form of the spike protein, the original COVID came out, and I shouldn't say it was real lethal, it's about 1 or 2% mortality rate. But still, that's significant, higher than the flu. Getting a vaccine with that particular COVID shape did actually prevent some COVID deaths in those who were susceptible to COVID deaths. But then the strain changed after a few months, and that vaccine was no longer beneficial. In fact, the risk probably outweighed the benefits, and it took some time to be able to get the new vaccine to fit the new morph. And then what actually stopped the COVID pandemic, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, what stopped the COVID pandemic is what I call God's vaccine. And God's vaccine was the Omicron. Omicron was far more, you caught an infection, 100 times more likely with the Omicron strain of COVID, and that produced antibodies that pretty much produced, herd immunity in the population. And then all of a sudden, the COVID just seemed to go away as far as the lethal aspect of it. Of course, the strain itself was not as lethal. Omicron was not as lethal, but it did get the antibodies up there. And so as far as what helps COVID, of course, if we avoid the infection, it would be helpful, but it was really not rational to think that you could avoid that infection forever because of how pervasive it was and where it went out. But the one substance, there was a lot of things that helped with COVID. By the way, being outdoors, infrared light was very helpful for COVID. And you know, I remember when they mentioned the whole continent of Africa was going to be wiped out because they didn't have a good medical system. And as soon as it went to Africa, you were just going to see the continent just pretty much wipe out. That never happened. Why didn't it happen? Because Africans spend a lot of time outdoors. And that infrared was protecting them. We even know that in a hospital setting, if you were next to the window to get infrared, you would be more protected than a bed that was not next to the window and not getting the infrared. The infrared increased intracellular melatonin, which was very helpful for COVID. And the one supplement that beat all supplements as far as preventing hospitalization in COVID was actually melatonin. 10 milligrams of melatonin at bedtime upon getting COVID for 1 month, and you were safe. Melatonin is the most potent antioxidant known to mankind, and we know the antioxidants were extremely important under COVID. All right, I'll answer, I think, one more question, and then we'll need to depart or go to refreshments. Not depart, but go to refreshments. Any other questions? All right, no one is brave enough to ask about the sex and mental health talk. And I thought for sure, normally in an audience we get a lot of questions about that, but it's okay. I know what will happen is I'll get a lot of questions in private, but that's okay too. All right, I think I'm ready to turn it over to Carrie and... Oh, yes. Let me introduce these two. So these two have been running community depression recovery programs for a long time. And they've also worked together and also separately. But Katie, who you've been seeing here every night, I have a nickname for her. Her name is Sarah. And it's actually, her full name is Serotonin. And Carrie's name is Mel, or melatonin. And so you're going to see serotonin and melatonin tonight. Are you guys going to do a song? They've made some great songs that go along with their community depression and anxiety recovery program. And they're just looking at each other. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see what we get. Come on up. Serotonin and melatonin.
It's the Tonin sisters.
We're not going to sing for you tonight.
Well, that's what you think. I might change my mind. Like Dr. Nellie says, both of us are pretty passionate about depression recovery. We've been running these programs for a long time. Mm-hmm. Probably as long, about 2010, I started to run them. And these programs are run with tremendous success. Because we've seen over and over and over again, we've seen people that have really got their lives back, haven't we, Kerry? I want to tell you a story about one guy. His name was Tony. I wanted to read you his testimony, but actually I was out the back trying to find it on my computer, and it just didn't want to bring it up. Tony came along to one of our information sessions. He was so anxious, he couldn't get out of the car. And he sat in the car, and he sat in the car. Now Mella and me, we were inside, and we were kind of tired, and we were thinking, oh, it's a no-show. Nobody's come. And we were like, okay, let's pack up and go home. When this guy should have gently and quietly and carefully walks in the door, and he says, look, I'm sorry, I'm late. He explained to us later why, about his anxiety. Anyway, he came in, and we showed him what the program was and what it was about. And then he said, I'll do it. And we told him when it was going to start, and we started off, didn't we? Well, the same thing happened on the night he came to the program. He got a serious anxiety attack in the car, and he couldn't even get out of the car, but he forced himself to come in. He came through the whole 8-week program, and he wrote me a fantastic note, and he said, Katie, I just want to I want to thank you, your team, and Dr. Nedley and his team, because you've truly given me my life back. He said I was in such a mess. He was the worst salesperson at work, and he ended up being the best salesperson. He'd crashed relationships. He managed to put them all back together, and he said, I now feel fantastic, and if I could bottle this feeling, I would be a billionaire, he said. So that's...
Euphoria. We might get to none.
We've already had too much information.
We have got story after story to tell you about people who have gone through the program and turned their lives around. So we're enthusiastic, but we're not going to drag you through any more stories now. What are we going to do?
No, we're not. I'm simply going to tell you the cost of the program. So there is a cost to this program. There's materials involved with the program, and there's also, you get to sit a depression and anxiety assessment test, which is done electronically. And so we're able to offer this at a very reasonable price here for the sake of Dr. Nedley's visit. We're going to run the program. The cost of it would be $150 per person that goes through it. It is an 8-week program. If I've just given you depression because you think, well, that's it, I can't possibly afford this, and now I can't even go, don't be depressed about it. Come and talk to us, and we would like to make it possible for you to come through, not impossible, okay? So it's our heart to get you on and get you through and help you to do that and work out a way. In fact, I saw a monument in Parramatta Square, and it was of a young man named James Martin, and the monument simply said it was this young Irish boy who was setting off to school in Parramatta when he was only 12 years old, and it said, I will find the way, or I will make a way. So we will make a way for you to be on our program.
Henry Ford? Oh,
No, it wasn't. It was James Martin. You didn't.
Abraham Lincoln also said, what did he say? Determine that the thing can and shall be done, and we will find a way.
That's it. So we will find a way for you to be on this program. Even if money's a barrier, come and talk to us. We'll make it happen for you. So what you need to do is Kerry, alias Mella, will be down the end of the hall where we're going to have our refreshments. We've got registration forms. We need you to fill those forms out and give them to Kerry, and then we will count you as being on the program. So not this coming Tuesday night, but the following one is when we will begin. It will be Tuesday night. It starts at 7 o'clock. It goes for 2 hours, and 1 hour of that almost is listening to Dr. Nedley, and we get to hear all of his lectures about, not in person, but on DVD. So it's only once a week for 8 weeks, and at the end we have something to celebrate, and we always have a fantastic graduation where people are just like off the wall. They're really happy because of what's happened in their life. So if that's you, if you want to come, then please go and see Mella at the back of the hall, and she will take you through that. That's me. I'm done. I hope you've enjoyed the evening, and I'll pass it back to
Thank you, Katie. I'm inspired. Of course, you know. Hey, thank you guys again for coming. We appreciate you guys taking the time. We know that time is very important to everyone. So I really do want to say thank you. I really mean that. Thank you for coming. And Dr. Nedley, again, thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to be here with us. As per every single night, we have some refreshments following right afterwards. And I just want to close with a word of prayer, if you don't mind. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for your desire to heal us. And we ask that you please be with us. And I pray, Father, in a very real way, that if there are people here who have depression, anxiety, or other mental health problems, I pray that they really can find healing, and that if there's some way that we as a church can help them to accomplish that, we ask that you please enable us with our hearts and our minds and our attitudes to be friends and to be able to help. We ask you these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you very much.